I didn't realize that a single Sunday dinner would shake the foundation of our entire family. But looking back, that was the night everything started to crack. The pride, the lies, the assumptions, and the roles we'd all silently agreed to play. Sunday dinners in our family always followed the same script: warm greetings, polite small talk, and then, without fail, a subtle descent into comparisons, quiet judgments, and those tiny, needle-sharp comments wrapped in smiles. That evening was no different. Or at least, it didn't seem different at first. Sarah had taken command of the table the moment she sat down, her voice bright and polished like a TV host showing off a prize. For the first 20 minutes, she proudly slid her phone around the table, presenting photo after photo of her freshly renovated kitchen. Marble counters, custom cabinets, a backsplash she had been planning for months. "It's amazing what you can do when you own a home," she said with a flourish, tapping her screen to reveal yet another shot of gleaming granite. "The equity just keeps growing. Not like renting, where your money disappears every month." She didn't look at me when she said it, not directly, but she didn't have to. Everyone at the table followed her gaze. Mom nodded in glowing approval, beaming at her oldest daughter as if Sarah's success made the whole room brighter. "Sarah's always been smart with money," Mom added proudly. "She thinks ahead. Plans for the future." I stayed quiet, focusing on my plate as I always did. Silence had become my armor, a shield against the subtle reminders that, to them, I was the family underachiever. The one working at what they assumed was a small consulting job. The one driving the modest Honda. The one living in a rental in a less fancy part of town. Dad carved his stake with unnecessary force. "Speaking of rent," he began, never a good sign. "Emma, you really need to think about your future. You can't rent forever. At your age, successful people are building equity, not paying someone else's mortgage." Sarah leaned back with a satisfied smile, the kind that said she had won a competition no one else signed up for. It's not her fault. Not everyone has the credit score or savings needed to buy. She sounded helpful, but her tone dripped with condescension. "But there are programs for first-time buyers, people in your situation." "My situation." She said it like a diagnosis. Sarah had crafted her image with precision. Top of her business class. A prestigious marketing job. Buying a house at 26 using discipline and smart planning. To the family, she was proof of what success looked like. And me. I was just Emma. The quiet one. The unremarkable one. The one who didn't seem ambitious enough to want more. From across the table, Uncle Robert chimed in, eager to contribute. "The housing market is brutal right now. You need real income, perfect credit, strong savings. Not everyone can handle that." I nodded politely, pretending the green beans were the most interesting thing I'd ever tasted. Sarah continued, her voice smooth and sympathetic in a way only siblings can manage, soft on the surface, sharp underneath. "Renting isn't wrong. It's just easier. Some people aren't ready for the responsibilities that come with owning property. Taxes, repairs, insurance. It requires real financial maturity." Mom patted my hand, giving me that look of concern laced with disappointment. "Maybe start small, sweetheart. A condo. Something manageable." Dad didn't even bother to lower his voice. "If she can qualify for a mortgage." The table chuckled softly. I didn't. But I didn't say anything either. The evening dragged on with stories about Sarah's promotion to senior marketing manager, her 5-year plan to upgrade to a bigger home, her dream of a 3-car garage and a pool. I played my usual role, nod quietly, smile politely, keep the peace. During dessert prep, Sarah cornered me in the kitchen, her voice gentle, her smile rehearsed. "Don't take Dad's comments personally," she soothed. "We all just want to see you succeed." I rinsed dishes in silence, my face calm, my mind elsewhere. "If you ever need help getting pre-approved for a mortgage," she went on, "I know a great realtor who works with people who have tighter budgets." I thanked her, the way I always did. The drive home was quiet, giving me space to breathe, to let the familiar frustration settle into something heavier. This wasn't the first time the family had played out this performance, not even close. Every Sunday, the same roles. Sarah, the shining example. The family, Her cheering squad. Me, the quiet disappointment. And they believed it wholeheartedly. Because they had no idea, none at all, what was really going on. They didn't know about Sarah's late-night phone call 18 months after buying her house. They didn't know about her panic, her tears as she confessed her company was restructuring and her job was gone. They didn't know her mortgage was $3,200 a month and she only had 6 weeks of savings left. They didn't know her entire image, her success, her stability, her perfect life was on the verge of collapsing. And they didn't know who saved it. They didn't know that the underachiever, the renter, the one they pitied and patronized, had been secretly paying Sarah's full mortgage for the last 2 years. While they applauded her financial genius. While she lectured me about building equity. While they pitied me for renting. I was the one keeping her afloat. Not renting because I couldn't buy. But renting because I was already a landlord. Many times over. But they didn't know that. Not yet. And the night they found out would become the most unforgettable dinner our family had ever experienced. The storm outside had mellowed into a cold drizzle, but inside the Oval Office, the tension only thickened. Eisenhower stood near the window, his hands clasped behind his back, staring at nothing and everything at once. The weight of the presidency was new on his shoulders, heavy, unfamiliar, and strangely suffocating. He had commanded millions of men across continents, had watched cities fall and empires crumble, had walked through the ashes of war with the calm resolve of a man born to lead in chaos. Yet right now, he felt unsteady. Because this wasn't a battlefield. This was politics. And politics was a war where the enemies shook your hand. Across the room, Attorney General Herbert Brownell flipped through the papers on his lap with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. The rustle of pages sounded far too loud in the quiet room. It was written on September 24, 1952, Brownell said softly. 20 days after the scandal broke. Eisenhower didn't move. And Truman sent this to the Justice Department. No, Brownell replied. He didn't send it anywhere. That's the problem. He kept it hidden. The general finally turned. Hidden? Brownell nodded. Hidden in a private file labeled Transition. It should never have been in there. That file only came to us today because of the formal transfer audit. He exhaled. Sir, he was preparing to have your running mate indicted. The words hit like a blow. Eisenhower felt them, not in his chest, but in his pride. In his sense of honor. For a moment, he said nothing. He merely stood in the center of the Oval Office, a place he had admired from afar, a place he had respected as the shrine of American leadership, and now, a place that hid secrets against him. He walked over to the desk and looked at the letter sitting there as if it were a loaded weapon. A letter that should never have been written. A letter that could have ended his entire presidential campaign. A letter that Truman, his own predecessor, had quietly prepared in the background. Brownell spoke again, carefully. I don't believe Truman intended to actually follow through with it. Eisenhower raised a brow. Then why draft it at all? To pressure you, Brownell said. Or to control Nixon. Or to limit your campaign's momentum. Maybe all three. But whatever his motive, sir, this letter changes everything. It did. Not because of its legal implications, those were gone. Nixon had survived the scandal with a single speech that shook the nation. But the political implications? Those were volcanic. Suddenly, the door opened, and Sherman Adams entered. His face carried the same controlled tension Eisenhower had seen on soldiers who approached him before battles. Mr. President, Adams said with a curt nod. You need to see this. He handed Eisenhower a second document. This one wasn't from Truman. This one was a memo from the Justice Department, dated only 2 days before the election. Eisenhower read it quickly, then slowly, then again. His jaw tightened. Truman's administration had already prepared a plan to brief the press if the indictment moved forward. Detailed. Calculated. Timed. This wasn't a warning. This wasn't a formality. This was political warfare. And Truman had smiled, shaken his hand, walked him through the White House as if nothing had been brewing behind the curtains. Eisenhower felt anger rise, quiet, cold, disciplined anger. The kind that didn't explode. The kind that sharpened. Brownell stepped forward. Sir, we believe Truman planned to use this to force Nixon off the ticket, making you replace him last minute, destabilizing your run. The general closed the file and placed it gently on the desk, as if setting down the body of a fallen soldier. Truman had fought wars too. But this wasn't wartime leadership. This was politics at its ugliest. He finally spoke. So the man who calls himself my friend drafted the destruction of my vice president and hid it from the American people. Adams exchanged a glance with Brownell, neither dared to answer. Eisenhower took a deep breath, the kind he used before giving orders no one wanted but everyone needed. Bring me the schedule, he said quietly. We're adjusting today's agenda. Brownell blinked. Sir, I'm going to the Truman Library luncheon. The room froze. Adams nearly dropped his papers. Sir, after this? Are you sure? Yes, Eisenhower said, voice steady. I am sure. He wasn't going to cancel. He wasn't going to avoid confrontation. He wasn't going to hide like Truman hid his intentions. He would look Truman in the eye today. And Truman would know that Eisenhower knew. Not through yelling. Not through accusations. But through presence. Through power. Through silence that said more than words ever could. Because leaders didn't win by shouting. They won by showing up. He moved toward the door, adjusting his tie, his expression composed but unreadable. Behind him, Brownell whispered to Adams. He's not going as a guest anymore. Adams nodded slowly. No, he murmured. He's going as the man Truman underestimated. And as Eisenhower stepped into the hallway, surrounded by Secret Service, press cameras, and the hum of a new Washington morning, one thing became clear. The polite, post-election cooperation Truman expected was over. History had just shifted. The battle between two presidents, one outgoing, one incoming, had quietly begun. And Eisenhower was walking into it not as a victim, but as a commander. The presidential motorcade rolled through Independence, Missouri, with a calm dignity that hid the storm brewing inside the lead car. Eisenhower sat in silence, the landscape blurring past his window, small-town storefronts, clusters of people waving flags, children perched on their fathers' shoulders. To them, this was a ceremonial moment. A peaceful transfer of power. A friendly luncheon between presidents. But inside Eisenhower, something tightened with every passing mile. He wasn't going for ceremony. He wasn't going for optics. He was going because Harry Truman needed to look him in the eye knowing exactly what he had done. As the car slowed, Sherman Adams leaned forward. Sir, if you prefer, we can still politely excuse ourselves. A brief illness. No, Eisenhower interrupted without looking at him. I don't use illness as a shield. Adams nodded reluctantly. He already knew there was no changing his mind. The car finally turned onto the long driveway of the Truman Library grounds, rows of white chairs, a small stage, cameras being adjusted, guests chatting under a winter sky. Truman's people had done their best to create an atmosphere of unity. But unity wasn't the air today. Not anymore. As Eisenhower stepped out of the car, flashes burst instantly, photographers eager to capture the historic moment. He offered a controlled smile, the kind that held firm under pressure, but his eyes stayed sharp, calculating. Then he saw him. Harry S. Truman. The former president stood near the steps of the library, bundled in a long dark coat, hat tilted slightly, his hands clasped comfortably behind him. He looked calm. Almost too calm. A man confident in the narrative he believed was unfolding. A man who did not yet know the narrative had changed. Truman stepped forward with his familiar half-smile. Well, General, I hope you're ready for some Missouri hospitality. Eisenhower returned the smile, just not the warmth. I never refuse hospitality, he answered, especially when it comes with history. For a split second, Truman's smile faltered. He wasn't sure why. But he felt something different, something colder, beneath Eisenhower's tone. They walked side by side toward the entrance. The cameras followed eagerly, unaware of the invisible tension stretching between the two men. Halfway to the stage, Truman leaned in slightly. You look tired, Ike. Busy morning? The question was innocent enough unless one knew the truth. Eisenhower stopped walking. Just for a breath. Just long enough for Truman to notice. Then he turned. "I've had an enlightening morning," he said. Truman's brow shifted. "Enlightening?" Eisenhower held his gaze. "There are things in your transition files I wasn't expecting." Truman froze. Only for a microsecond. But Eisenhower saw it. Brownell had been right, Truman didn't expect the audit team to deliver everything. The two stood there, surrounded by an audience that thought they were witnessing a friendly handoff. But what they were witnessing was something far rarer, two presidents locked in a quiet, political standoff disguised as a cordial exchange. Truman cleared his throat and forced a warm chuckle. "Well, transitions can be messy," he said. "Some things get shuffled around. Nothing to worry about." Eisenhower stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "Some things shouldn't be shuffled at all. Especially letters addressed to the Justice Department about my vice president." Truman's breath caught. He didn't expect Eisenhower to know. He definitely didn't expect him to bring it up here. Not now. Not before a crowd. But Eisenhower wasn't here to make a scene. He was here to deliver a message without raising his voice. Truman swallowed. "Ike," he murmured, "this isn't the place." Eisenhower nodded. "I agree." Then he stepped forward and walked past him, calm, silent, unshakable. Truman remained standing, staring after him with an expression the cameras couldn't read but those close enough could. Shock. Unease. Maybe even regret. Sherman Adams whispered to Brownell from the crowd. "This is the first time in history two presidents are smiling for the cameras while waging war with their eyes." Brownell nodded. "And the cameras have no idea." The luncheon began. Guests applauded. Speeches were delivered. Truman spoke first, his voice steady but lacking its usual confidence. He introduced Eisenhower with generous words meant to signal unity, cooperation, dignity. But Eisenhower knew those words came from a man who had once prepared to sabotage him. Then it was Eisenhower's turn. He stepped to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and paused. The audience leaned in. Not because they sensed tension, no, they felt none. But because the new president commanded silence the way only a five-star general could. He began politely, formally, respectfully. But then, without naming Truman, without referencing the letter, without revealing anything private, he delivered a subtle blow sharp enough to slice through Truman's composure. "There are moments in leadership," he said, voice steady, "when integrity matters more than victory, when trust matters more than strategy, and when the American people deserve transparency above all else." A whisper ran through the audience. A few turned to glance at Truman. He sat still, jaw tight. Eisenhower continued. "And I intend to lead with that principle, not behind closed doors, but in the full light of the American public." Brownell inhaled sharply. That wasn't just a line. That was a declaration. Truman's hand clenched on the armrest. He felt it. He understood it. The cameras didn't. The crowd didn't. But Truman did. Eisenhower had just publicly reclaimed the moral ground Truman tried to undermine. Without shouting. Without exposing him. Without making a scandal. A victory won with discipline, not drama. When the speech ended, applause erupted. Truman clapped too, but slowly, mechanically, like a man applauding his own miscalculation. As they walked offstage, Truman leaned toward Eisenhower. "You made your point," he said quietly. Eisenhower didn't look at him. "I haven't yet." Truman blinked. "Then when will you?" Eisenhower stopped at the steps, sunlight hitting him from behind like a halo carved from steel. "When history looks back," he said, "and sees who acted in shadows, and who didn't." Truman swallowed. Not fear. Not anger. Something heavier. A realization. He had underestimated the general. Gravely. And the quiet political war between them had only just begun. The luncheon ended, but the conflict did not. By late afternoon, Washington buzzed like a hive struck by a stone, not because the public sensed anything, but because those within the political machine felt something shift. A tremor. A disturbance. A fracture in the illusion of harmony between two presidents. The press covered the luncheon as a triumph of unity. Eisenhower and Truman show historic cooperation. Presidents stand together in Missouri. But those headlines were built on photographs, not truth. Anyone who watched closely, anyone who read faces, knew something colder moved beneath the surface. Back in Washington, the West Wing felt different when Eisenhower returned. More alert. More guarded. More aware. Sherman Adams was waiting at the entrance, his expression tight but composed. "Sir," he said quietly, "you need to see this." Eisenhower didn't break stride. "Another letter?" "Worse," Adams replied. That stopped him. Adams handed him a thin folder, unmarked, unofficial, the kind of papers that traveled only by hand. Inside were notes. Memos. A timeline. A list of names. Brownell stepped beside him. "We dug deeper into the Justice Department archives," he said. Specifically, Truman's internal communications with senior officials. Not the ones he released. The ones he hid. Eisenhower felt heat rise at the back of his neck. "Go on." Brownell took a breath. "Sir, the plan went further than just a letter." He handed Eisenhower a memo dated October 2, 1952. A memo Truman had kept private. It outlined talking points for a potential press briefing, one that would be executed only if the indictment of Nixon moved forward. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the name written at the top. Strategy coordination with senior White House staff. Eisenhower flipped the page. The list included people Truman trusted the most during his final months. Speechwriters. Advisors. Political strategists. And one name that made Eisenhower's jaw clench. J. Howard McGrath, former Attorney General. McGrath. A man known for his loyalty to Truman, but also for the quiet dirt he had buried for administrations before him. Eisenhower looked up. "You're telling me Truman used the Justice Department as a political weapon?" Brownell nodded. "Sir, it appears he was preparing to." Adams crossed his arms. "Truman wanted to push Nixon off your ticket. He knew if Nixon fell, your campaign would stagger. And if your campaign staggered, nobody would reach the White House," Eisenhower finished. That sentence hung in the air like a blade. Because it wasn't speculation. It was strategy, the kind of strategy a cornered politician uses when he believes the world owes him obedience. Eisenhower walked into the Oval Office, the folder still in his hand. The room felt brighter than it had that morning, but the brightness felt dishonest, like a spotlight shining on a crime scene. He placed the folder on the desk. "Close the door." Brownell and Adams entered, closing the heavy door behind them. Eisenhower sat a slowly. Deliberately. "I want every detail," he said. "Every memo. Every draft he never meant for us to see. Every conversation he thought died in the dark." Brownell exchanged a cautious look with Adams. "Sir, if we expose this, it will scandalize the office of the presidency. Truman's reputation will be destroyed." Eisenhower's voice was calm. "I didn't say expose it." Both men blinked. "Then, what are we doing?" Adams asked. Eisenhower leaned back, fingers steepled. "We're learning." "Learning what, sir?" "What Truman feared," Eisenhower said. "Because a man only plots in the dark when he fears the light." Silence tightened the room. Then Eisenhower stood and walked toward the window, staring out at the White House lawn, the same lawn where he once walked as a celebrated general, never imagining the man in the Oval Office would one day try to sabotage him. He spoke without turning around. "Gentlemen, Truman was willing to weaponize the government against me before I even set foot in this building. What makes you think he planned to stop after I arrived?" Brownell felt a chill. "You believe the danger isn't past." Eisenhower finally turned. "It's never past," he said. "Not in politics." He walked back to his desk and tapped the folder. "This isn't about revenge. This is about defense." Adams frowned. "Defense against who?" Eisenhower didn't hesitate. "Anyone Truman influenced. Anyone who thinks they still owe him loyalty. Anyone who believes undermining this administration is worth the risk." He sat again. And make no mistake, there will be people who think it is. Brownell nodded slowly. The Truman machine. Exactly. Truman had built alliances deep inside Washington, career officials, department heads, political operatives, people who didn't care about who was president as long as they remained powerful. And now, Eisenhower was their new obstacle. We'll identify them quietly, Eisenhower said. No purges. No public drama. We will simply remove leverage where Truman once had it. Adams leaned forward. And what about Truman himself? Eisenhower's expression shifted, calm, firm, unshakable. I will treat him with respect. I will honor his service. But I will not forget what he tried to do. He paused. When I look a man in the eyes, I know if he's finished fighting. And Truman isn't finished? Brownell asked. Eisenhower shook his head. No. He's just changed battlefields. Brownell exhaled. So what do we do now? Eisenhower looked at the folder one last time, then closed it. We prepare, he said simply. We build trust where Truman left suspicion. We bring light where he used shadows. And most importantly, he straightened. We lead the country not with force, not with secrets, but with the truth he chose to hide. Outside, the winter sun finally broke through the clouds and flooded the Oval Office with a sharp, almost blinding brightness. Adams glanced toward it and murmured, "Feels symbolic, doesn't it?" Eisenhower allowed a thin smile. "Let's hope so." But deep inside, he knew the truth. This was not the end of Truman's interference. It was only the moment he realized how much of it still remained unseen. In the days that followed, Washington moved with its usual rhythm: briefings, meetings, dinners, diplomatic calls. From the outside, it looked as though the Eisenhower administration had stepped seamlessly into power. But beneath the surface, a quiet war continued. Invisible to the public. Undeniable to those living inside it. The Truman machine still had influence. Whispers reached the West Wing. Career officials stalled certain requests accidentally. Files arrived late. Reports disappeared for a day only to reappear with no explanation. It wasn't blatant sabotage. No, it was more clever than that. Like vines that wrapped around the roots of a tree, slowly choking it. Eisenhower noticed. Every single time. He wasn't a politician by birth. But he was a commander by destiny. And he knew sabotage, even the political kind, when he saw it. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the Washington Monument, casting long shadows across the Oval Office floor, Brownell entered with something in his hands, something heavy, both physically and for what it implied. "Sir," he said quietly, placing the file on the desk, "this is the last of it." Eisenhower raised a brow. "The last?" Brownell nodded. "All known documents Truman withheld from the transition. Everything we could trace, dig up, or rescue from private storage. There's nothing else, at least nothing visible." Eisenhower sat back, staring at the thick stack of papers. "So this is the full record of every attempt?" "As far as history will ever know," Brownell replied. Adams entered moments later, closing the door behind him. "We've confirmed it," he said. "The sabotage was real. The planning was meticulous. But Truman didn't act alone. His advisors, some of them still in government, weren't ready to let go of their influence." Eisenhower nodded slowly. "I knew." They exchanged glances. "What will you do with it, sir?" Adams asked. It was a fair question. The contents of the file were explosive. If released, Truman's reputation would collapse. The public would see a former president using justice as a weapon. History would judge him harshly. But Eisenhower wasn't Harry Truman. He didn't fight from the shadows. He didn't use secrets as leverage. He believed in something simpler, something harder: statesmanship rooted in honor. So he closed the file gently and pushed it aside. "Nothing," he said. Brownell blinked. "Sir, nothing?" "Nothing," Eisenhower repeated. "We will not release it. We will not leak it. We will not weaponize it." Adams frowned. "But Truman made his choices," Eisenhower finished. "And I will make mine." He stood, hands resting lightly on the edge of the desk. I didn't come here to tear down the man who came before me. I came here to build something better. And history won't remember me for the battles I fought in private. It will remember what I built in public." He walked toward the window, looking out at the lights of the Capitol. "As long as we know the truth," he said, "we can guard against anyone trying to repeat it." Brownell sighed a long, relieved breath. "So that's it." "No," Eisenhower replied softly. "That's the beginning."